What if I told you that speaking your mother tongue could cost you everything you have worked for your entire life? What if a single phone call lasting less than 3 minutes could destroy your career, your reputation, and your sense of belonging in the country you call home? This is not a hypothetical scenario or a made-up story designed to generate clicks. This actually happened to a young woman named Mei Lin Chun, and what unfolded in the 48 hours after she was escorted out of her office building would shock millions of people around the world and ultimately change her life in ways she never could have imagined. Picture this for a moment. You are sitting at your desk after working 12-hour shifts for 3 consecutive weeks. You have sacrificed weekends, missed family dinners, and poured every ounce of your energy into proving yourself at a company that promised you opportunity and growth. Then your phone rings. It is your elderly mother calling from across the world, and she sounds frightened. Without thinking, you answer in the only language she understands. And just like that, everything you have built comes crashing down around you. But here is where this story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Because sometimes, when the world pushes you down to your lowest point, the universe has a way of placing exactly the right person in your path. And in Mei Lin's case, that person happened to be a self-made millionaire who would recognize her from a moment she had completely forgotten. Mei Lin Chin was 26 years old when she moved from Shanghai to San Francisco with nothing but 2 suitcases, a degree in business administration, and an unshakable belief that America was the land where dreams came true if you were willing to work hard enough. She had grown up watching American movies with her grandmother, dreaming of skyscrapers and opportunities that seemed impossibly far from her small apartment in China. Her parents had sacrificed everything to give her the chance to study abroad, taking out loans they would spend decades repaying, all because they believed their daughter deserved a shot at a better life. Mei Lin promised them she would make every sacrifice worth it. She would become someone they could be proud of. She would prove that their faith in her was not misplaced. For 3 years, Mei Lin worked her way up from an unpaid internship at a small marketing firm to a junior account manager position at Sterling and Associates, one of the most prestigious advertising agencies on the West Coast. She arrived before anyone else every single morning and left after the cleaning crew had finished their rounds at night. She learned to speak English without an accent by watching television shows on repeat and practicing in front of her bathroom mirror until her jaw ached. She straightened her hair to look more professional. She changed her name from Mei Lin to Mei because a supervisor once told her that clients might find her real name difficult to pronounce. She did everything society told her she needed to do to fit in, to belong, to succeed. And slowly but surely, it seemed to be working. Her performance reviews were exceptional. Her clients loved her attention to detail and her tireless work ethic. She was being considered for a promotion that would finally allow her to bring her parents to America for a visit. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, and Mei Lin was sitting at her desk reviewing campaign analytics when her personal cell phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and felt her heart stop. It was her mother, and her mother never called during work hours because of the 16-hour time difference. Something had to be wrong. Mei Lin excused herself and stepped into the hallway near the elevator bank, a semi-private area where employees often took personal calls. Her hands trembled as she answered. Her mother's voice came through the speaker, shaky and confused, speaking rapid Mandarin. Mei Lin's father had collapsed at work. He was in the hospital. The doctors were running tests, but nobody would tell her anything, and she was terrified and alone. For 2 minutes and 47 seconds, Mei Lin spoke to her mother in Chinese, trying to calm her down, trying to get information, trying to be the strong daughter her family needed her to be in that moment of crisis. What Mei Lin did not realize was that her supervisor, a man named Gerald Patterson, had followed her into the hallway. He stood there listening, his face growing increasingly red with an emotion Mei Lin would later struggle to identify. Was it anger? Disgust? Fear of something he did not understand? When Mei Lin ended the call and turned around, she found herself face to face with a man who looked at her as though she had committed an unforgivable crime. Gerald did not ask if everything was okay. He did not express concern about the obvious distress on her face. Instead, he said 5 words that would haunt Mei Lin for months to come. "We need to talk. Now." What followed was a nightmare that unfolded with horrifying speed. Mei Lin was brought into a conference room where Gerald and an HR representative named Susan were already waiting with folders and paperwork spread across the table. They accused her of unprofessional conduct. They claimed that speaking a foreign language in the office made other employees uncomfortable and created an exclusionary environment. They said that multiple colleagues had complained about her in the past, though they refused to provide any names or specific incidents. When Mei Lin tried to explain that her father was in the hospital, that she had only stepped away for a few minutes to take an emergency call from her terrified mother, they cut her off. Policy is policy, Susan said without a trace of sympathy in her voice. We have to maintain a cohesive workplace culture. By 5 o'clock that same day, Mei Lin had been terminated. Security escorted her out of the building carrying a cardboard box filled with 3 years of memories. Her desk plant, a photo of her parents at her college graduation, a small jade dragon her grandmother had given her for good luck. As she stood on the sidewalk watching the sun set over the San Francisco skyline, Mei Lin felt something inside her break. Not just her heart, but her belief in the promise that had brought her to this country in the first place. Mei Lin spent the next week in a fog of depression and disbelief. She could not bring herself to tell her parents what had happened, especially not while her father was still recovering from what turned out to be a minor cardiac episode. She applied to dozens of jobs, but heard nothing back. She started to wonder if Sterling and Associates had blacklisted her somehow, if the stain of her termination would follow her forever. She stopped eating regular meals. She stopped returning calls from friends. She spent hours lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she should just give up and go back to China where at least she would not be punished for speaking her own language. Then her roommate, a young woman named Jessica who worked as a social media manager, convinced her to share her story online. At first, Mei Lin refused. She was too ashamed, too broken, too convinced that nobody would care about what happened to her. But Jessica was persistent. She reminded Mei Lin that staying silent only protected the people who had wronged her. She reminded her that other people might be going through the same thing and feeling just as alone. Finally, with shaking hands and tears streaming down her face, Mei Lin sat in front of her laptop camera and recorded a video telling her story. The video was raw and unpolished. Mei Lin's voice cracked multiple times. She had to pause to wipe her eyes and collect herself. She did not try to make herself look sympathetic or craft a perfectly edited narrative. She simply told the truth about what happened to her, from the phone call with her mother to the cold efficiency of her termination. She talked about how she had spent years trying to erase every trace of her Chinese identity to fit in at work, how she had changed her name and her hair and her accent, and how none of it had mattered in the end. She asked a question that would resonate with millions of people who watched the video. How much of yourself do you have to give up before you are finally good enough? She posted the video on a Tuesday night, expecting maybe a few hundred views from her small circle of friends and followers. By Wednesday morning, it had been viewed over 2 million times. By Thursday, that number had climbed to 15 million. News outlets started picking up the story. Legal experts weighed in on potential discrimination claims. Other Asian Americans began sharing their own experiences with workplace prejudice, creating a wave of solidarity that spread across every social media platform. But the most significant response came from a source Mei Lin never expected. A man named David Park, a 43-year-old tech entrepreneur who had sold his artificial intelligence startup for $400 million just 2 years earlier, watched Mei Lin's video at 2 in the morning while battling insomnia in his penthouse apartment. Something about her face struck him as familiar, though he could not immediately place where he had seen her before. He watched the video 3 more times, studying her features, listening to the cadence of her voice. And then it hit him like a lightning bolt. He remembered exactly where he had met this young woman, and he remembered what she had done for him at a moment when he had been at his own lowest point. 3 years before Mei Lin's termination, David Park had been a man on the verge of destruction. His startup was failing. His investors had lost faith in him. His marriage was crumbling under the weight of his obsession with work. One night, after a particularly brutal board meeting where his own partners suggested he step down as CEO, David found himself wandering the streets of San Francisco in a daze. He ended up in a small dumpling restaurant in Chinatown, a hole-in-the-wall establishment with fluorescent lights and plastic tablecloths. He sat in a corner booth, staring at nothing, contemplating whether the world would be better off without him in it. The waitress who approached his table was a young woman working her way through an unpaid internship by picking up night shifts at her aunt's restaurant. She looked at this broken stranger sitting alone at midnight and saw something in his eyes that frightened her. Instead of simply taking his order and walking away, she sat down across from him and asked if he wanted to talk. For 2 hours, this young waitress listened to a man she had never met pour out his fears and his failures. She did not offer empty platitudes or tell him that everything would be okay. She simply listened with genuine compassion, occasionally refilling his tea, never once checking her phone or looking at the clock. When David finally left the restaurant that night, he felt something he had not felt in months. Hope. The young waitress had reminded him why he started his company in the first place, not for money or fame, but because he wanted to create something that would help people. He went home and spent the entire night reworking his business plan. Within 6 months, his company was profitable. Within 2 years, he had sold it for a fortune that would allow him to spend the rest of his life giving back to others. David had never forgotten that waitress in the dumpling restaurant. He had gone back multiple times trying to find her, wanting to thank her properly, wanting to tell her that she had saved his life. But she had quit to focus on her internship, and no one at the restaurant remembered her name. For 3 years, she remained a mystery, an angel who had appeared exactly when he needed her and then vanished back into the universe. And now here she was on his phone screen, crying about being fired for speaking Chinese. David did not sleep at all that night. By morning, he had formulated a plan. He reached out to Mei Lin through direct message, identifying himself and asking if she would be willing to meet with him. Mei Lin initially thought it was a scam. She had received hundreds of messages since her video went viral, many of them cruel, some of them predatory. But something about David's message felt different. He mentioned the dumpling restaurant. He mentioned the night of the board meeting. He mentioned details that only someone who had actually been there could possibly know. They met at a coffee shop in the Mission District on a sunny Saturday afternoon. David arrived first and watched as Mei Lin walked through the door, nervous and uncertain, clearly unsure whether this meeting was a good idea. He stood up and looked her in the eyes and said something she never expected to hear. "You saved my life once. Now I want to return the favor." What followed was a conversation that lasted 4 hours and covered everything from David's journey as a Korean-American entrepreneur facing his own share of discrimination to Mei Lin's dreams of one day starting her own marketing consultancy focused on helping Asian-owned businesses. By the end of that conversation, David had offered Mei Lin a position as Director of Community Engagement at his new philanthropic foundation. Not as charity, he emphasized, but because she was exactly the kind of person he had been searching for to help him fulfill his mission of supporting underrepresented entrepreneurs. Mei Lin accepted on one condition. She would only take the job if David also helped her fight back against Sterling and Associates. She did not want money. She wanted policy change. She wanted to make sure that what happened to her would never happen to another employee at that company again. Together, Mei Lin and David launched a public campaign that combined legal pressure with social advocacy. Sterling and Associates initially tried to defend their actions, issuing tone-deaf statements about workplace culture that only inflamed public anger further. Within 3 months, facing boycotts from major clients and the threat of a discrimination lawsuit they knew they could not win, the company agreed to every demand Mei Lin and David put forward. They issued a public apology. They implemented comprehensive diversity training for all employees. They created clear policies protecting workers' rights to speak any language during personal calls. They established a scholarship fund for first-generation immigrant students pursuing careers in advertising. And perhaps most importantly, they fired Gerald Patterson and Susan from HR, both of whom had treated Mei Lin with such callous disregard. Today, 3 years after that devastating phone call that nearly destroyed her, Mei Lin Chin stands as one of the most influential advocates for workplace equity in America. She runs the David Park Foundation's flagship program, which has provided grants and mentorship to over 2,000 immigrant entrepreneurs. She speaks at universities and corporations across the country, sharing her story and challenging audiences to examine their own biases. She reconciled with her parents, who now live in a small house in Oakland just 20 minutes from her apartment. Her father made a full recovery and loves to tell everyone he meets that his daughter is famous on the internet. And every Tuesday night, without fail, Mei Lin returns to her aunt's dumpling restaurant in Chinatown and works a shift as a waitress. Not because she needs the money, but because she never wants to forget where she came from or the power of a single act of kindness between strangers. Here is what Mei Lin's story teaches us about life and about ourselves. We live in a world that often punishes people for their differences instead of celebrating the unique perspectives and strengths those differences bring. We live in a world where fitting in sometimes requires sacrificing pieces of our identity that we can never get back. But we also live in a world where the right connection at the right moment can change everything. Mei Lin did not know she was saving David's life when she sat down in that booth at midnight. David did not know he would find her again when he could not sleep and decided to scroll through social media. Sometimes the seeds we plant in one season bloom in ways we never could have predicted. So here's what I want you to take from this story. Never underestimate the impact of showing kindness to a stranger. Never let anyone convince you that who you are is something that needs to be fixed or hidden. And if you are going through your own version of what Mei Lin experienced, know that this moment of darkness is not the end of your story. The person who will help you rise might be watching right now. If this story moved you, I need you to do something for me. First, hit that like button so more people can discover Mei Lin's incredible journey. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear that their identity is their strength, not their weakness. Third, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications because we share stories like this every single week. And finally, drop a comment below telling me about a time when a small act of kindness changed your life. I read every single comment, and I would love to hear your story. Remember, you never know who is watching and who might need exactly what you have to offer. Be the person in the dumpling restaurant. Be the one who sits down and listens. You might just save a life.